wife and I, we talked about it for a long time. I've been wanting to do something like this for many, many years. And when the districting came out, we thought about it, we talked about it. It's a huge decision. I would say I really, for about a month and a half prior to declaring, on pretty much the last day, every day it was, let's do it, let's do it, let's do it. And then finally, we took the plunge. It definitely, it cost us some time, for walking and meeting people, but we came in full speed and it's been great.
So so basically what have you been doing in it's been about 2 months now in terms of campaigning?
Everything. I knew it was going to be a lot of time. I probably didn't anticipate just how many other things, from endorsement questionnaires and all the forums and just walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors, setting up events with friends, so I can meet people in different neighborhoods. But there's something every night. And because I work for University of Washington and a lot of the candidates, we all work full-time jobs, I'm shut off basically from about 8 a.m. till 5 p.m. And so I'm up early in the morning just trying to catch up on notes, figure out what's going on. And in the evening there's either an event or an activity or an interview like this.
So when you talk to people when you're doorbelling or whatever, or people at the evening events, what have you found lately that people have been most interested in talking to you about regarding this?
Well, the first is always parking. I feel like almost no matter what neighborhood you go to, people are worried about parking. The most moving conversations I've had, I'd say there are two strains. One is people who have lived here for years and years and either have had their business rent increase so much that they've had to shut down and start working from home or move, or people who can't afford to live here anymore. I just met a woman over in Genesee, Mary, last week, who trains service dogs. And we talked on her porch for 15 minutes. And she's world-renowned. People bring their dogs from all over, but they're veterans and disabled people who don't have a lot of money, so it's not a big income for her. But she's about to leave West Seattle because she feels like she can't afford the rent in her place right there on Genesee. So stories like that really hit you. You find people who've been here for a long time, people who are really bought into the community, who want to have a business here. She used to have 3 employees, but she wasn't able to keep them. So stuff like that really sticks with you. The other is, I've talked with people from Alki, Admiral, particularly in Alki, who feel very strongly that the community feeling is being lost. And they're not really opposed necessarily to new townhomes coming in or new development, but they feel a really palpable sense that a lot of people moving in and a lot of the development is being done that doesn't really connect people to the history or the personality of the neighborhood. And so it's just sort of a melancholy or a sadness that how do you keep West Seattle for the reasons that people moved here 30 years ago or the reasons that people moved here a year ago.
What do you think as a city council person you could do, if anything, about that?
Boy, it's incredibly challenging. I think, for one, is making sure that you are talking to people in all of the neighborhoods so you really get a sense of what everybody's feeling, what everybody's seeing. It's hard to do. I mean, you see it canvassing in a campaign. I'm sure it will be twice as hard when you're mixing in your committee meetings and everything else. But you need to be in the community talking to people because that's what sort of charges you. It's certainly what drives me to do it. Policy-wise, I think I guess it depends on the angle you take. If you're looking at how do you come up with policies that govern what gets built, zoning with the new, low-rise, mid-rise development, moving more property potentially from single-family to multifamily. Cities like San Francisco have done a little more proactive job, I'd say, in making sure that when someone's building, property owners have the right to do, to work with their land, do what they want, but they've found a way to keep roofs are slanted so that more light comes in. So you're not really building and casting a shadow on 2 blocks or 2 neighborhoods who've been there for many years. I think little things like that, they seem difficult and they seem like you'd have opposition, but I think you'd really find that people buy into the idea that I don't run into anybody who's opposed to density or new development. Nobody's like, no, that's it. Everybody stop. But everybody wants it done in a way that involves them. They feel like they have a share. I know there was the issue happening over near Westwood with a development coming in where the neighborhood association just wanted to talk to them. They actually sent a really nice letter, and I loved it. It was friendly, it was warm, it was diplomatic. It was not, we don't want you building here, we don't need you. It was, no, we appreciate that you're bringing good units to our neighborhood, but they wanted to talk about what kind of businesses might be in it, how they were going to build along the street, what they were going to do to connect to local parks, things that were important to the people who live there. And I think that's a great way to get everybody involved and connected.
Do you think there's anything that could be done to help Mary, who I know who you're talking about?
Oh,
She
yeah.
used to have a storefront on California
Yeah.
Avenue. That's probably where she had the three employees.
Yeah.
Anything in terms of the city's policies toward business or rents or?
Well, until I'm a strong believer in the state repealing like the city's ban on doing rent control, and I think that we need to come up with policies down the road that really prevent business leases and home leases from being doubled, or people getting a 50-100% rent increase after your lease is up. So many times small businesses like that, or a bar or a restaurant, let's say that they're one of the first restaurants in an area, they sort of build the personality. You can feel a community building around them, and then when their lease comes up in 10 to 12 years, it's doubled, and then they have to leave, and you get this really sad sense of, but you're a cornerstone, you're a foundation to this block, and now you have to leave. I think the surest way is making sure that rent increases are always very fair and reasonable, and don't just scoot somebody out who can't pay twice the same amount when their income, for Mary's business, is going to be static. It's going to be, relatively stable, but it's a hugely important contribution to West Seattle.
So we've heard a little bit of your story at forums about your past and your work on the community newspaper and all
Yeah.
that. But tell us a little bit more about how you wound up in West Seattle. What led you here?
Well, when I started at the newspaper, I won't go back into that just yet. But previously, I was working for Rails to Trails Conservancy in Washington D.C. And my oldest brother is a professor here at the University of Washington. And so I started visiting, once a year, twice a year, 3 times a year, and just absolutely fell in love with Seattle. And 2 of our very closest friends, and now through them, many, many other friends, live here in West Seattle, and we just loved it. Every time we arrived, you'd feel like you were pulling into a place that was a little slower, a little more residential, and a little more friendly. And we've lived all over the country together, my wife and I, Danielle and I, either together and separately, from D.C., Chicago, Boston, Atlanta. She was in school in Arizona. And this is the first neighborhood here, not even just Seattle, this is the first area that has really felt like home, where we want to dig in. It's where we bought our first house together. I mean, we're here for the long haul. This is the first place that we've just felt, you want to stay. And so that's what inspired me to get involved this time. It was just the first time it felt right.
So it's a single-family home,
Yes, it is a single family home.
which brings us to a question that we're going to ask each candidate. This week, of course, there was the document which came out regarding single-family homes, and we kind of like to hear what you had to say about that.
I've talked about that with a number of people since it came out. If that's true, that that many home lots will be rezoned, I just think you have to be really careful about protecting the homes that have been here a long time, the people who've been here a long time. It's way too tempting. Let's say there's someone who's been in a home for a long time and decides to move or sell it. Somebody buys that home and then immediately splits it into 2 or 3 townhomes, depending on what they're able to squeeze in a lot. It's not always a bad thing. It's definitely not always a bad thing, but you really risk changing the entire character of a street. The street I live on, 21st Street, the houses run the range from basically 1 bedroom, 1 bath to a few newer, larger homes, but it's different house by house. And when we moved in within hours, and I mean actually within 30 minutes, neighbors on one side brought us a bottle of wine, introduced themselves. 2 doors down the other side brought their 2 daughters and a bottle of wine to introduce themselves. And we now know an entire chunk of people, you wave hi to them. We have front porches and yards, and that community feel can be threatened by if you break it all up and squeeze too much develop on the lot. So it's not final yet, so I don't know how it's going to go, but it makes me nervous. I know density is important, and I'd rather make sure that we preserve the character of some single-family home neighborhoods that really do have something special.
What did the people that brought it up to you have to say about it?
Well, there was the example I was mentioning earlier. I forget their street in Alki, but there was a row of like 5 1920s bungalows, and they were all torn down. And then they added something like 9 townhome units. And they weren't really against, I don't know if you know this street you're talking about.
55th, probably.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, they're actually attractive. They're not bad-looking buildings at all. But, there was a row of trees taken out, and the houses were gone. And their real concern now isn't even that. It's that a lot of the people coming in are just for a year and then moving on, which is what happened. That's what rentals are. But previously, there was a real sense of that block being part of a long-standing neighborhood where neighbors knew each other. And now, and the one gentleman, also last night, somebody was saying, everywhere he's lived, he always knows his neighbors. And now, he feels like he hasn't said. Some people don't say hi, don't really look, and they're living their own lives. They're going to work. But I think that's a real thing that can be lost, and that's what they were afraid of with the townhomes. They were sad about what was gone, but they're more afraid of what happens to the. Do they still feel connected to what Alki used to be? Do they care what Alki was or is, or what it means to the people who've lived there for 20, 30 years on the same corner?
There seems to be a real tension between the rights of the people that are here already and the rights of the people who want to come here but maybe can't find housing. So, and I would expect that as a council person, you'd find yourself kind of trying to work with both sides of that.
Absolutely. I mean, but you want something that really respects, trusts, and not gives priority to, but you don't want to make policies that hurt the people who are already here, who are already work here, live here, invest here, raise their kids here, go to school here. I think that's an important thing to value. And so when you're talking about how people are coming in, how do you balance their needs? People want to move to West Seattle. We're booming. It's got a great appeal. Part of that is when you're building new apartment buildings, let's say you have 20, 30, 40, 60, 80 units, is making sure that a lot of them are still affordable for people who do live here. So if you tear down a few old homes, somebody buys 2 or 3 old lots, let's say along Delridge where I live, and they're going to build a new building, you're really hurting local existing residents, renters or buyers, if nobody that you just displaced could possibly afford living there. You might be helping at a market rate apartment other people swooping in and moving, but what you've done is just ripped up a piece of the fabric of what was here, and then displaced people. And so you need to create units, but you need to make sure that so many of them are affordable and really available for people who are here, so you're not pushing people out.
So on another hot topic, the one that is considered by some to be the hottest topic in the election, as much as we've been talking about housing lately, is transportation.
Yes.
What are some of your key points that you've been hitting when talk turns to that?
Light rail, and more light rail. I love that it looks like ST3 might be moved up. We might even get a chance to vote on it as early as next year. I mean, I want it now. I think a lot of people in Seattle who've lived here for a long time have a different perspective, but I spent a lot of years in D.C. with the Metro there, in Boston with the T, and in Chicago with the L. In those cities, it's been around so long that it's just ingrained in the culture that this is what you do. A lot of people line up, they go into a station, they take a train in. And the link is growing, but you try to, it seems so far away. I heard stories from people in D.C. in the 70s and 60s who lived there, including Chaz, actually. His home was right along it. And so it was major disruption when you're digging these huge tunnels through existing neighborhoods. And so I think that's what people are afraid of here. But if we don't do it now and delay another 10 years, it'll be that much harder. And when you have it, that's the only way to have a truly mobile, connected, fluid, mixing city where people can move from West Seattle, go to Ballard to dinner. They can go to work at UW. You can zip. My office now is right across from the station that'll be opening up, and it's awesome. I don't know if you've seen. They've opened the Rainier Vista there and the Burt Gilman, and my office is right next to it. It's beautiful. People are going to be able to get off the train from all directions, well, currently just from the south, but go to the stadium, go to class, go to work, hop on the trail from there. I want that in every neighborhood, and I think everyone agrees, but then you bump into sort of the ancillary concerns of, well, how do we deal with parking? There's no parking right in the city right now, or maybe there's one up in North Lake. So how do you build light rail to West Seattle, and how does everybody get there? How does everybody move from their different neighborhoods to the hub to connect to it? That might actually be, everybody's like, yes, light rail. It's where do you put it? Will there be parking, and how do we get to it?
In the shorter term, do you have any particular points in your platform or things that you've been supporting or talking about that to kind of work on the issue that's been described now as the ingress-egress to West Seattle sooner than light rail?
I think a big one is we need some crosstown direct routes, whether express or just continuous, that really connect our West Seattle to the northeast of the city. There's no way to get to UW, the third largest employer of the state, directly. I've tried the bus a few times. If you catch the 120 at 7's about the last time that it's not full. On the best day, you're switching downtown to the 70, it's still an hour and 15 minutes. One way. Coming home, it can get really ugly and take up to 2 hours. And you can't expect someone to give up, an hour and a half or 2.5 to 3 hours a day on a bus. It's a lot of reading, but that's just a lot of time you could be doing everything else. So I think a great option is expanding, and Rapid Ride goes north, which is wonderful, but it doesn't offer that cross service. If we can find a way to draw in more people from South Park and other areas of here on buses that will go all the way across the city, it'll help. Let's say it's probably still going to be I don't know, maybe a 30-40 minute ride because we don't currently have enough just bus only lanes. But if people are able to get a seat, they're able to read, they're able to zone out, they're able to get where they're going directly and shave an hour off your day, that's huge.
What about the upcoming transportation levy? Are you going to vote for it or against it?
I think I'm going to vote for it. I think it's important that we do keep investing. I don't love it. I don't love that West Seattle has just like a few crumbs from the whole 930 million. But I think it's important that we do keep prioritizing these investments and that we do it. And so Seattle's been told several times that our turn's coming, and I don't really like sitting and waiting. But we're a city, and if this is our role is to play along now to ensure that we keep investing all over the city and everybody gets included, then I will begrudgingly vote yes.
So when you've been out talking to people, what are their views of it so far?
I don't think a lot of people have a really strong view of what Blue Seattle is or what's in the levy. I think a lot of people have the same concerns we all do about just drawing on property taxes for this. But I have heard from people that there's a concern about, what's the language? It's not really a war on cars, but there are a lot of people in West Seattle, and I understand it's a central element of life in Seattle, I think, is having a car. Being able to go to San Juan's, being able to go skiing, go camping, hiking. And there's some concern that the city is spending too much money on bike, ped, and active transportation infrastructure on too many streets and making it harder to drive, or that's certainly the perception. I mean, I'm a big fan of bike commuting and going around for errands. My old organization, I think we were actually one of the first to use active transportation. We kept pumping it everywhere, and now we have an active transportation coordinator for the city. So it's nice to see the phrase and the whole idea getting traction. But I'd say there's some concern about the way that the investment is shifting I forget what our number of mode share is for bicycling, but it's pretty small. And so for people who don't ever cycle and do a lot of driving, I think they're concerned that drivers are being squeezed out.
Interesting thing you mentioned is bicycles. Bicycles really are kind of a hot topic. They do punch some people's buttons. And one of the things we've asked about is not so much should we have different bike lanes and safe routes and so forth and so on, but should city council get involved in creating discussions between the people who are bicyclists and the people who aren't to do something about that acrimony? Would you?
Absolutely. Because I mean, I'm both. I'm a cyclist and a driver and a walker and a runner, and I do all these things. I drive, commute, carpool. I'm actually going to try biking in to work next week. We'll see how that goes. I think bringing people to talk together, to really stressing how really smartly designed bicycle infrastructure, whether it's a cycle track that's separated, helps everybody. If you're really convincing people to get out of cars and into bikes, even if it's just a few, you are easing traffic. But good bicycle design on a road, good infrastructure, also increases legibility for everybody.
But that, again, I'm talking about doing something about the emotions involved. It's a very emotional topic, regardless of what side you're on.
I've had people nearly lunge at me, not me personally, but when the topic comes up, they're like, let me tell you about those bicycles. I'm like, oh, it's okay. And they know that I'm a pretty strong supporter of bicycle infrastructure. I think absolutely that's a role that the city council can play, that I would love to play, is getting people together to talk about. I think this is central to all city council issues, is bringing everybody to talk. It's so easy if you are just an advocate of one or an opponent of one to sit in a bubble and progress that way, but I think it would be huge to get somebody who is car only to talk to somebody who is predominantly bicycle, or a whole group of these people in a room, and talk about, what are your concerns and what are your views versus what are your concerns, what are your views. I think we'd end up finding a lot more overlap and understanding that way.
So the transportation point brings me to, we've talked about some of the hot topics, transportation, housing. What do you think isn't being discussed enough overall in the campaign, that people aren't asking you about enough, that you wish you could talk about more?
All these forums, and what haven't you heard?
I have not heard nearly enough about just general environmental issues. I realize that this is our first time in the district, so everybody's really focused on the granular. I think there's a huge opportunity here to focus on a bunch of areas, from the Duwamish cleanup, which I think is huge. I'm a big supporter of what's happening there. Chance to make the Duwamish one of these signature, water features and attractions in the city, and a big generator of jobs, recreation, health, and activity for South Park and around. That's a big one to me. I think protecting our parks and green belts. I think Seattle and West Seattle too, we take it for granted that we're sort of a global environmental leader. It's like, oh, we're progressive, that's great. If you blink your eye, every time we're building something or adding an area, trees are going down, park spaces are getting encroached on, and unused land is getting developed. Unused land is such a vague concept to me, but let's say you have a half acre that has nothing built on it. Maybe the city owns it, maybe someone else. To me, that land is precious. We have lots of land that already has been built previously that could be redeveloped or repurposed. Save the land, plant trees on it. It doesn't have to be a full park. It doesn't need maintenance necessarily, but everything we protect now, whether it's in a green belt or in the little pockets between among houses, that's going to keep our canopy healthy, and that's going to keep West Seattle green.
Have you read up at all on you mentioned natural areas and green belts. There's a hot topic on that one about whether the Parks Department should open to more uses.
I did, yeah. And so the the debate is whether it should be something like zip lines could be added or some other areas.
Bike trails.
Bike trails, yeah. Oh yeah, like sort of technical mountain bike trails.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read all the details, but I'd be uncomfortable with opening up too much. I do like the idea of mixed use, and just outside of Seattle, Tiger Mountain, Rattlesnake, these have incredible mix of uses. I think in urban parks, you have to be careful about not promoting too many uses that actively disrupt other people's enjoyment, whether they're just walking a dog or sitting or reading a book. So I'm a little uncomfortable with the notion, but I want to read more.
In terms of you also mentioned the unused land. Have you talked with the people who have been working on the issue about the substations that City Light wanted to sell off? That seems to be kind of part of the city has some surplus spots, but they say they have to make money from them because the city budget doesn't have everything that it needs.
Yeah, I haven't heard anybody specifically. I haven't talked too much about it, but those are the kind of lots that, if it's a absolute necessity that's one of our revenue sources is selling off city-owned land, which feels kind of strange, then maybe I understand that, but that's the kind of land that you hang on to. It doesn't require a lot of active maintenance, but as everything else gets built up, as we lose all kinds of views and access, those spots will suddenly gain, will treble in value, and we'll all be wishing we still had more land that wasn't touched, that could be converted to a park, or could just be turned into a tiny little, mini forest.
You mentioned that was in your past that you worked for a conservancy organization.
Yes.
So were there specific policies along these lines that you had worked on in the past that experience that you would expect to translate to a city council decision?
Well, we were Rails to Trails Conservancy, so we were sort of converting former and unused rail lines into public, hiking, biking trails like the Burke Gilman. What was great about that job is you're working with local advocates. Like our job was to promote, write about, really support, and give technical assistance. And this is what got me excited about the Duwamish Trail and things like that. These great ideas all came from local groups, and the ideas are all here. What I learned was whatever town you went to, there were awesome partnerships between city planners, city councilors, local groups, and they were the ones who were making it happen. The city provides the support and sort of the legal framework and funding in a lot of cases. But it taught me that you don't need to come in with all the ideas. In fact, you'd be doing yourself and the city a massive disservice if you assumed that you had the entire vision for the area. Tap into what's on the ground. I know there were so many big ideas that can happen all over West Seattle. And as your job at the city, and this is why I'm excited about the opportunity, is to facilitate them, help them bring their vision to life.
How do you think it's going to go with people from 7 districts and the 2 at-larges and a totally different mix than what's happened before?
It's certainly going to be interesting whether you're involved or not, objectively. I don't think it's going to be as factionalized as some people say. I think that there's probably going to be a settling in for a year or two, particularly as we're going to have a lot of new faces in general, so a lot of people are going to be getting oriented. I think we're going to find that the city, a lot of the issues that face us are huge citywide issues. Public transit, that's not just us. We have particular needs, but that's everybody. And it's in our interest to serve that it extends. It's in my interest as a West Seattle driver that we have it all the way to Everett. It's my interest that it goes all the way to Tacoma. I would hope, certainly my own hope would be that we would really find an awful lot of overlap in our interests, and that I really, really, really hope it doesn't break down into, I'm not voting for yours until my district gets what we need.
Have you had the opportunity to meet any of the folks from other districts so far?
Yeah, a bunch. And just last night I was at the Greater Seattle Business Association little cocktail mixer where I think there were 40 plus candidates.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and sitting council members. And so it's been really fun. People you see in pictures and you read about their comments and you know what they're doing. Didn't get a chance to meet them. There's so much energy, so much positive just energy and outlook. It's kind of no matter what happens, there's going to be a huge burst of people so excited to get into City Hall and get to work.
So if say somebody walks up to you or you're talking with them and they tell you that they're going to vote for one of the other candidates in the race, what is the short version of why you tell them that they really want to vote for you instead?
You mean after the fist fight?
Yeah.
The short version is, when I started, I thought that we were all 9 pretty similar candidates, but we're actually pretty different in terms of our style and our outlook. And if you want to boil it down, it's not the sexiest pitch, but I'm someone who I really believe there's always a solution. It doesn't have to be the very best, and it's not going to please everybody, but I'm the kind of person who's always looking for a way to say yes to a great project and not looking for excuses or concerns or a reason to scuttle a really good idea.